Hi, welcome back to Quad Pod. Al Yates speaking. It's episode 14, and you haven't missed one. We didn't really do a 13. That was more of an advert for the evening with Brian McDermott and friends. In terms of Brian McDermott and friends, it's only about a week away, so do get your tickets and do look out for the auction and the raffle prizes that will be published over this weekend. Coming today is Friday. Thanks to Steve Flack. He does like his building. Great servant to Exeter City, and no job too big or too small in the East Devon area if you want to talk about football. Trust update. The Exeter corporate report has been published on the website. It took a little while to get there, but being positive, it's a real step forward. And if you want to have a good read and want to understand how much we sold Joe Randall for, or who were paying as directors, then please do have a look and take some time to understand it. There is some great reading in there. With this weekend coming up, we've got Cheltenham away. Again, hats off to the 1,300 or 1,400 Exeter fans that are going to be joining us in Cheltenham. See you there. Another positive, Exeter women. There's a play on words here. I did see the goals, and we were too good. It has to be said for Portishead. I think it was 6-0 off the top of my head, and an almost 3,000 crowd at the park on a Sunday, and to see the faces, absolutely brilliant. So positive for the women and positive for the club in general. Really like that. In terms of things, what's not to like? Seeing the report that the average crowd for last year and seeing what we're getting at the moment, we're almost 1,500 fans up on the average. What's not to like? And now for the next episode, it is the lads from a land down under. Now, this took some real timing with the time zones to get sorted. I really want you to look forward to Andy and Giles, who are huge Exeter fans, although they do live on the other side of the world. So enjoy and sit back and hear a little bit about them, Australian football, and a few capers following Exeter City. Hi, and welcome to Quad Pod. I think it's going to be episode 14, because I'm not going to do an episode 13. I don't believe in it. This one is called They Come From a Land Down Under, which I know is a bit, they're going to groan at the other end. Well, I've got two Exeter fans that are coming on to talk about life in Australia. And I'm going to say, we've done North America with Chattanooga. We've done Europe. All right. We've done a bit of Australasia already with fan in Japan, Mac, who at least one of the guys online knows personally. But we've now got to Australia. It's the land of Jason Donovan, Kylie Minogue, In Excess, Ramsey Street, Steve Irwin, Nicole Kidman, and Olivia Newton-John. But today I've got with me, I'm going to say good day, because it's actually Sunday morning, and we're doing this just after the Exeter City versus Lincoln game, which I've travelled back from Devon to my home. It's about 9:30 in the evening. I wasn't speeding. But to introduce, firstly, I'm going to say hello to Giles Beattie, who is wearing a pink Exeter shirt with an Exeter mug, I can see. Good morning. How are you? Hello, Giles. I think we'll come back to Giles. I think we've got a problem there with his sound. And we've got Andy dying. Andy, can you hear me?
I can, Al. Morning or good evening to you.
Good evening. I knew we were going to have some fun and games. Giles is looking at me and he's feverishly trying to do something to.
Yeah, I just got cut off. So did I miss an intro?
You missed your intro, but I went, "Hi, how you doing, Giles?" You just smiled at me gracefully, and nothing happened. I've introduced Andy. Welcome. How are you doing? Are you well?
Yeah, good. Thanks. Thanks, Al. Apologies for the internet issues. But yeah, I think there was a kangaroo treading on my cable outside the front of the house. I just had to come out and get it off. But it's gone now, so all good. Thanks.
It was either that or a koala. So we're going to be authentic. So this may or may not go to plan. Right. So Giles, I think let's get this right. You're in Sydney. Is that right?
Yep, correct. I'm one of the many members of the Sydney Grecians, along with the other half of the Sydney Grecians, my brother Ed, who also lives in Sydney.
Brilliant. And I'm sure there's a couple more somewhere. And Andy is in Melbourne.
That's right. Yeah, in Paran in Melbourne. Been here 25 years now, or just coming up 25 years.
Right. And I'm going to say that I've actually been fortunate to be both places, and they are lovely locations. So let's introduce you guys. Let's start with Andy. Andy's, I'm going to embarrass him, slightly interesting character, is I believe he was one of the founder members of the Exeter City London Exiles. Is that correct?
Yeah, 1991.
1991, and you've been supporting since, you told me earlier, 1986. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, when I went to uni in Exeter, I started watching under when the exciting Colin Appleton was in charge, and we were the draw specialists. Barely won a game, but drew nearly every game, I think.
And we played the draw specialists of League One today and managed to beat them. And can I just give everybody a pictorial example? He's going to kill me now because I've already cracked this joke with him. He looks very similar now to Tony Kelly. Now he's got a moustache. I can say that because he said, "Oh yeah, I see what you mean." So Andy, please don't be offended by that. So London Exiles, yeah. Just explain a little bit about that, and we'll come across to Giles and his connections.
Yeah, no worries. Well, I finished uni in '89. City obviously had a really good season in '89 under Terry Cooper, and you could see it was going to go well. But I moved up to London to start work. Thought I'd go to just the local games: Fulham, Brentford, Leyton Orient, Peterborough, and I ended up going to, I think, to about 23 games and driving a minibus up to Lincoln for the final match with a load of people in the back. Oh, actually, it wasn't a minibus. It was a transit van because none of us was over 25. And I had about 10 guys sliding around in the back of a transit van as I drove up, feverishly hoping I wasn't going to lose my license. But as I went to more games in and around London, I started to notice there were faces you'd see regularly. And I remember having a chat with Dave Crockford or Al Crockford at Peterborough when they were selling the X Directory and said, "Do you know anyone who's from London?" And they pointed me to Dave Peters, who was amongst the fans in the away end that day. And then we had a chat. He gave me a lift back to London. We thought, there could be something in this. So I remember writing to the programs at Brentford and Leyton Orient, just a little piece, any extra fans in London, get in touch. And we eventually had a get together after the Leyton Orient game in November '91. I can't remember the name of the pub. Roger will. Roger Pine will remember where it was. And there's like half a dozen of us who started the Exiles. See if I can remember them. Dave Manlove, Roger Pine, Dominic Sanders, myself, Dave Peters, and one of Dave's mates called Mickey Haler, who I think now lives in New Zealand. And from that six, we decided we formed the Exiles. And we then started organising travel, and it sort of ballooned from there.
And do you know what? It's going really well. I mean, I'm gonna guess that it must be into the hundreds of members now. They are regularly travelling. Neil Lemillier, by the way, big shout to Neil. He is phenomenal with organising the transport and stuff.
It's amazing, yeah. How many people they get to games and how far out he plans everything. I'm still on his emails, and it's like, book your tickets now for the 17th of April in such and such. It's really impressive.
Is that the GNet mailing list you're talking about?
No, he's got a sort of specific travel one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because it was through some of those connections that the trust grew legs, to be honest. So, cool.
Right.
Yeah. Right, we'll come back to the next house because they're absolutely fabulous. Giles, Giles and I know each other because I was a very probably tubby Ronnie Jepson style centre forward or a very industrial Piers Sweeney right back. But you used to play football for Exeter City WorldNet team, didn't you?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And not only that, you played for some other teams, I think, or played in other places.
Yeah, so I guess I discovered the Exiles, Exeter Exiles in about 95, 96. I was at university in Guildford, and I remember going to a match at Leighton Orient on a big open terrace behind the goal, and City won 3-0. I think Mickey Ross scored, and I met some of the Exiles there. And I think, Andy, I think the original pub might have been the Birbeck Tavern.
I think that rings a bell, yeah.
Yes.
I don't think it exists anymore. But anyway, that was a great introduction.
Yeah, it does exist, by the way.
Okay.
It does?
Sorry, definitely exists.
And that was a great introduction to some of the Exiles. And then I think I made a plan soon after to go to a cup game, Colchester away. So that was at Layer Road. And that was eventful. One, everyone I seemed to meet was called Roger, and two, there was a bit of trouble, and the Colchester fans ended up storming the away end and stealing the flag.
Really,
the flag, and it ended up getting set on fire in the home end. So it was.
Now there's another bit to that story because yes, you're right, and actually I suffered for that because I lived in Colchester a few years later after that, and somebody tried to set on me, but because I lived in the town and I knew where I lived, I didn't have any colours on, and I managed to convince him I was a Colchester fan, which is quite funny. But about 4 years ago, Colchester came back down to Exeter and actually stole a flag. Right, after the game, right? And bit of shenanigans. I couldn't believe, and let's not go into the legals and the story behind that. But yeah, there's no love lost at Colchester. So you were at Colchester, yeah?
So that sort of I felt I had a bit of safety in numbers in that one, and sort of walking to the ground with the Exiles, and that felt like a good sense of community as well. And then skip forward a few years, and when I left university from Cardiff, I was working in London from 2000 for 15 years until we moved to Australia, and in that time ended up playing football, pool, and occasional fill-in on the darts, but mostly pool and football. So when I played, we had two football team, the Exeter Exiles and Exeter Exiles Bays.
Right.
Played for 7 years under the great leadership of Tom Borthon, who was running the team for most of that time. And Jason Harcourt was one of the stalwarts of organising it, as well as Richard Barnes and Al Crockford, who always made sure everything worked out, and then we had teams. And the pool team, I played with Neil Lamillia, who you've mentioned already, and Neil's really been the foundation for the whole Exiles in London, and without him, I don't think we would have had enough momentum with a lot of the travel, and getting cheap train tickets, and it was really good. It was a good sort of social scene for many years in London. It's quite an anonymous place to live if you don't know people, and you're instantly plugged into a social scene. So yeah, it's great. And also I don't think I'm a very good footballer, but it gave me an avenue to play football and wear the City shirt, and as well as the Exiles bays. Yeah, like you said, Al, I played for the WorldNet team up in Leeds every year, and then when we started doing the WorldNet team in Greece, I was one of the founding players in that team and went there for I think 5 or 6 years as well. So that was always the warm-up tournament in June, ahead of the WorldNet tournament in July. So, but yeah, it's more about warming up by drinking lots of mythos by the pool and watching the Euros or World Cup or whatever's on TV at the time.
Rather
again, a social, more of a social thing.
And now you're both in Australia, right? I'm going to say Andy's got more of an Australian accent or twang, definitely. And I think the last time we spoke was more than 10 years ago, I'm guessing. So you're both into the Australian scene. Now, I think that you both support local teams. Is that correct? So, Andy, who do you support?
I support Melbourne Victory in the A-League, which is the sort of main national league here.
And that would have been the league that Sean Devine played in. I don't know if you listened to that one.
That's right. Yeah, he played in New Zealand, or for the New Zealand team, as you would have heard.
Okay, and then we've got Sydney FC. I'm guessing, Giles. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. So
is that a grudge match?
Yeah, there's a big. They call it the Big Blue. So right. Sydney FC versus Melbourne Victory, because Sydney FC play in light blue and Melbourne Victory play in dark blue. Or correct me, Andy, if there's a different.
Yeah, no, that's it.
And then, but yeah, there is a, and I guess that's the traditional big grudge match that the league sort of have, because there's a local team in Sydney, Western Sydney Wanderers, but they formed later on, and that's a big grudge match as well in the Sydney games. But yeah, I think the traditional one is the Big Blue.
Okay, and so I think the two teams played last week. Is that right?
Yeah.
Oops.
They did.
Yeah, no. Sydney won 1-0. Is Victory's having a really poor season, sitting at the bottom of the table at the moment. So it was a reasonable result, really.
And what's the structure like now? How many teams are in the league now?
I think it's 12 at the moment. It might be 13, but I think it's 12. Right. But yeah, sort of almost on that rivalry thing. When there used to be a league called the National Soccer League that ran from the late 70s. But football or soccer in Australia for years has been a bit of a poor cousin. It's sort of ranks about third below Aussie rules or AFL and rugby league. Yeah. So it sort of sits third. It doesn't get the best TV deals. It doesn't get the most. It's very hard to find the reports in the paper, that sort of thing. So when they founded the league, they just had what they wanted to do was to try and have one club per city. Yeah. So initially you had no rivals locally, hence as Giles said, the Big Blue was sort of promoted as Sydney versus Melbourne, which is a common kind of rivalry anyway. Yeah. But over the years, they've added other teams, and it's a kind of franchise structure. So there's now 2 other teams in Sydney, Macarthur and Western Sydney that Giles talked about. And in Melbourne, we've now got Melbourne City and Western United. Melbourne City is part of the Manchester or the City Football Group that owns Manchester City.
Right, okay. And
so we've got local derbies, but we still kind of look towards, I guess, it's always nice to beat Sydney if it happens.
And do they, I'm just thinking Perth, which is what, 7 hours away in a flight, 6 hours?
Not that bad, about 3.5, 4 hours.
Oh, 4 hours. Have they got teams over there as well?
There's only Perth Glory at the moment. They haven't established a second team in the West. It's a bit of a challenge. To be honest, Perth is its own little island almost, because it is 3 or 4 hours flight away from the East Coast. So I don't know they'd necessarily have the support to have 2 teams.
Cool.
It's a great point about the distance, though, because one thing I've noticed here in following Australian football is that there's not that sort of away game culture that you see that we used to have in England and following City games. Even though a train to Darlington would be longer than a flight from Sydney to Melbourne, there doesn't seem to be that sort of attendance of every away game. So coincidentally, I was actually in Melbourne last week, catching up with Andy on the Friday, and I flew back to Sydney on the Saturday afternoon when just before the Sydney v Melbourne match would be on. And there were I didn't see any Melbourne Victory fans on the flight. And that flight landed at 6 o'clock and would have got you to the ground in good time for kickoff. So I was thinking this was City scenario that Neil will be on there with a dozen others and there'd be shirts everywhere and beers flying around and cards and all sorts.
It's interesting you say that because and I actually think you might notice a difference with the fans' culture. Sorry, when was your both your last matches? I'll go with Andy first. When was your last match in the flesh?
Blimey, I haven't been to the UK since 2010, so it's going to be a long time ago. The last actual City match I saw was in Rio.
On the Brazil game?
Yeah.
Do you know, I wish
that would have been the last time I saw you before last week, Andy, as well.
It probably was, yeah.
Really? Because you two got one over in the nicest way of me because I was at the time a bit of a workaholic and working too hard, and the not getting to the Brazil game is one of the biggest regrets of my life because there was a few hundred extra fans there, weren't there?
Yeah. It was fantastic experience, and it was also just lovely seeing a lot of the people I used to go and watch football with. That was great, but just the opportunity to see us playing, and then we went to a local league match up in Volta Redonda, and it's a really good experience. A bit of a long haul from here.
Can I say what's the flight time? Because you go the other way.
We went via the US. We spent a week or two in the US and then flew down to Rio and back from the States.
Right. Okay.
So, but it'd take, if you went from here to Rio non-stop, I don't know, 30 hours, 35 hours maybe. You'd have to change a couple of times.
Really? Okay. I thought it'd be. You think it's going to be closer because it's on the bottom of the world in effect, isn't it?
You could just, but there's not enough demand to go from Sydney or Melbourne straight to Rio. There isn't the demand to do that, so you'd have to go through somewhere else.
So it's been a while since you've both been.
I actually went last year, so I did a trip February, March last year on my own. So I hadn't been back for a few years and wanted to just see some family. So I did a trip without the family here and managed to get to. I definitely went to Swindon at home, which was a convincing win. 3-1, I think it was. I think that. But yeah, that was a good one to go to.
Cool. So you've seen where we are at the moment. So we haven't talked about the game today, and I haven't normally done it on the podcast. I know that one of you's watched it. Do you want to explain your football habits, Giles, and what you've done in terms of the game? And I think Andy just chose to do it a different way. But Giles, go first. Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the good things about being overseas is having an iFollow season ticket. You can watch every game live, regardless of the time. So there's no blackout issues.
Right.
So the problem is more so about the time difference. So the game kicked off at 2 a.m. this morning, and finished at 4 a.m. So
nice.
Normally I do it on delay and try and avoid the score for most of Sunday until it's posted.
Yes.
But today I thought, well, I'll watch it live because I'll be coming on to speak to you, and I'll see your smiling face and and your croaky voice from cheering all of the 7 City goals that I'm sure I would have missed if I didn't watch it. But yeah, it didn't. It's a bit of a challenge to. It's just that awkward time where it's basically the middle of the night. So I tried to go to sleep early and get up early, and I couldn't get to sleep. So I think I listened to the early match, and then I started listening.
Did you do that for home most weeks, like home and away?
Yeah, you can. What I can. I normally just do it on delay at the weekend because I don't have the luxury of a Lion.
Right. Okay. All right.
I think I had about maybe 2 hours sleep last night because I was still awake going into the match, kicking off at 2 a.m. and then I was dozing a bit watching it. Every time there was a goal, that woke me up, and I was like, "That's." And then ironically, at 4 a.m. when it finished, I was wide awake and couldn't get to sleep till about 5:30. So, and then the alarm went off at 7:30 to speak to you guys. So.
And can I just say, in the planning for this, and Giles did an absolutely sterling job, to get the three of us together on this was quite remarkable that we did it so quickly. But I'm going to say you're an absolute warrior for doing that. and I can only apologise. If you'd only said, I would have not.
That's all right. I thought I thought it would add to the appreciation of the challenges of watching in this time zone.
And Andy, do I take it that you took a more salubrious view of it and slept in?
Geez, yeah. It's I mean, interestingly, I guess I moved here in '98, and in that era, I don't think I even had. When I first got here, I don't think I even had internet at home. So that was the early days. Well, '98.
Yeah, of course you would.
I only remember just about getting email in '95, and so I would the opportunity to watch and stuff like iFollow just wasn't a thing, even in the dial-up era, that was never going to work. So I kind of got used to not ever really watching City, and obviously that, although it's now become available, I'm happy enough. I get up, I watched Gary, or this morning it was Kevin Nicholson on YouTube. I watched I watched the little clips on there. Listen from Chaz just to make sure what we had for breakfast, all the important stuff.
Yeah.
But so I tend to just watch the highlights that way. But occasionally I'll if it's a big game like the Argyle game earlier this season, or I think when what's his name died, when the Duke of Edinburgh died, all the matches got moved forward to like 11 or 12 o'clock kickoff, I think, to avoid a funeral. And that I think City played Southend, so I got iFollow for that. That was the crappiest game I've seen in a long time. It was 0-0. I think Southend were right near the bottom. We were doing all right. I thought this would be great. I think it was probably a season or two ago, and it was the dullest 0-0 I've watched in years.
Unbelievable. Well, and I can relate to that with the COVID, because obviously within lockdown, because I'm a season to go older, would you believe? And during lockdown, I could watch it, and I even got you can watch on YouTube the youth teams at your leisure. Because some of the games on there in terms of the academy, I'm sure that's probably a level you might not want to go to, but that is possible to you. So
I did used to go to reserve matches when I was in England, but I draw the line about dialing in and watching ones.
Yeah.
So
technology is a great thing, because some things you've just said there, we take for granted technology, because I can remember Club Call. Phone going on. And then you used to get the paper, didn't you? The Express and Echo at the time, Trina Lake, and it was like the paper.
Eggnog,
eggnog, and you've alluded to the fanzines, because obviously fanzine culture was far more important in those days. So unbelievable, right?
Good one. I remember. The club call was always a teaser, and there was one that was like a premium number 0898, and you'd see it on the teletext ad page. I think you'd look at the scores, and then there'd be a club call ad, and there'd be a little Exeter City one, and it said new strikers poised to sign, and you'd be like, oh, who's that? And I remember at university in Guildford there was this phone box that was broken, and you could phone these numbers for free. So if I'd see that little snippet, I'd trek down to this phone box on the other side of the campus, and I'd be like, and then you'd phone it, and it'd just be some vague reference to some journeyman that happened to be thinking about leaving Hull City, and that City were in a list of 6 other clubs that they might be interested in signing for, and watch this space.
Yeah, and you've touched on, for our younger viewers, right? They're looking at us thinking, or listening to us going, what are they talking about? You mentioned teletext. Now, I know that what page number was it?
302.
302 to 312.
312, that's right. Isn't that sad? Like 25 years after any of us could have probably ever used it, we can all remember the page that it was.
Exactly. And for the benefit of those that are thinking, what the hell are they talking about? You used to go onto your TV, right? And when you got a smart TV now, you used to pump in the number, right? You go onto a page, press a button, then pump in the number, and then you'd have to wait. And a 312 on transfer week would be about 10 pages, and they'd rattle through. And if you missed Exeter, you then had to sit there and wait for it to come around again. Yeah, and that's how you got it. So,
or even that was how you watched midweek games. You know, that you couldn't get to. You just have it on, keep refreshing the score to see if how we'd done. And
in the last 5 minutes, you'd be like on the edge of your seat, just watching teletext, wouldn't you? Hoping that we score a goal. Right, Australian football, guys. Right, former City players. Any Exeter City links that you can share? And I'll start with Giles, if you know of any.
Well, I know of current ones. So Steve Neville's son, Scott, he plays for Brisbane Roar. And he's probably at the end of his career in Australian football. I think he's 35 now. And he's a player that's played for quite a lot of different clubs. And so I know he's definitely played for Western Sydney Wanderers, Perth Glory, definitely those two. And I've seen him play a few times. He plays fullback, and he's a really reliable and strong player. And yeah, when I'm normally watching Sydney play against him, not a lot gets past him. And yeah, so I'm assuming he's a City fan through his dad, but haven't had the opportunity to speak to him to find out. But there's also
before we go any further, just for a bit of context, Steve Neville, his father was part of the 1989-90 championship winning team. His nickname was Weaver, and he used to get more penalty decisions than anybody else I've ever met in football. And he used to be able to weave round players for fun, and he was a winger. So that's interesting. Sorry, carry on. Do go on.
And then there's another current player who I think played either for the youth team at City or maybe one or two occasional sub appearances or loan appearances, and that's Craig Noon.
Craig Noon came. He came on loan to us from. Somebody will shoot me down and correct me. This is a Yatesism coming. I think he came from Cardiff City on loan, and he played for us for 2 or 3 months. And he again was a winger, wasn't he?
Yeah,
and a very good one at that. So
yes, I think he certainly played for Melbourne City at one point. I remember watching him play against Sydney in a grand final one year. This year, I think he's playing for Macarthur.
Yeah.
And he may have played elsewhere as well. It tends to be the players tend to just move around clubs a lot in Australia, and I guess it's a good way to see more of the country, particularly for some of those overseas players that come over. So one of the big overseas stars that we've had in this league is Alessandro Del Piero, and he played for Sydney FC as a marquee player, and when he was playing, I think they were getting crowds of 40,000.
Really?
That was before I moved over. I moved over 8 years ago, and he'd retired. But yeah, when I moved, there used to be these sellout crowds for the big games like the derbies, and when those sort of marquee players were playing.
Yeah, I remember seeing him take victory apart. I think we got thumped 5-1. And I think he scored one, but he set the rest up and just kind of ran the game, even though he barely walked. He sort of just stayed in the centre circle and dictated the game.
Wow, that reminds me of watching Luka Modric in Moscow when England lost in the semi-final. But when they beat Croatia beat us, but enough said about that. It was a long journey home. Andy, can you think of any guys?
Well, there's probably not so many that have actually played. Yeah, as Giles has said, Scott Neville and Craig Noon. Obviously, you had Sean Devine on before, who was playing for the New Zealand team in the league. The only other sort of City name that I've seen over the years I've been here was Trevor Morgan, who I believe also went to, because him and Steve Neville, when they left Exeter, went to Hong Kong.
Yes,
played for South China in the league there, and then I think they both ended up in Perth, which is probably why Scott started out there as well. And he may or may not, Steve Neville may or may not still live in Perth. He certainly lived there for some time, and I believe Trevor Morgan was there coaching in that region at lower level. So for the younger listeners, Trevor Morgan was assistant manager, I think, with us for a while. He also played on a couple of. He had 2 spells at least playing for City as a kind of traditional number 9 lumbering striker.
And sorry, Trevor, but you were very lumbering if you ever listen to this. Because I'm trying to be polite. I think he was he coming to the end of his career when he came to us?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. He was a waste of space, if I'm being honest. But hey, we've had a few of those over the years.
Well, yeah, and that brings us on to where you see Exeter from a distance now. So I'm going to start with Giles. What's your thoughts on where we are at the moment?
I think we're in a good place. I think relative to the crowd sizes and the spending in the league, I think we're punching around where we probably can expect to be, because we run reasonably well, and based on the crowds we got, we don't there's not the extravagant spend on this sort of big players like the past, like Lee Sharp and those sorts. There's a good balance of spend, and I think that creates a good sort of team feel, and it's really good seeing some of those sort of social media clips that the club send, where you see the players walking into the ground together or leaving together, and they're always like really having a laugh and chatting. You see a lot of the Premier League ones, and everyone's on the headphones and everyone's kind of a bit in their own world. But I think the City ones definitely show that there's a culture of teamwork and everyone's there for each other, and I think that's really been really key to the success in the last few years. Be good to reach some of those initial. I think there was an aspiration for a 2020 plan or something where we'd be in the Championship by 2020. I think that was something pitched around the early 2010s, and that I think unless there's a firm plan and a growth plan to develop the ground a bit more, or a plan around the generating revenue from the stadium in the week, I don't know how that we could sustain being in the Championship if we got there.
It's interesting you say that. It's interesting you say that, because somebody was telling me at the Burton Albion, who are struggling in the league and have small crowds, make £4 million out of non-match day revenue. And that's because they're in the centre of the country, and they've got a stadium with a big car park, and they're doing loads of conferencing. So to your point, Giles, I think you make a great point there. And I think there's a lot more could be done. Sorry to jump in. Carry on. Keep going.
That's right. I think I like St Park as it is in the city, and as a a stadium rich in history, and also the stadium that I seen my first saw my first match there, and great memories of that. I wouldn't want to go to an out of town stadium like the Chiefs have got. That's the stadium there, and they've got all of that revenue coming in from the hotel and conferences and things. So I think it's finding a balance that finds a way to make the existing setup work.
No, I agree. Andy, thoughts?
Yeah, well, having watched and followed City through so many years when we've struggled in whatever league we've been in, it's just been the last 7, 8, 10 years have been a kind of joy. Just we've been competing at the top year after year in League Two. We've got the promotions, and to be honest, at this level, as Giles has just said, with the capacity we have, with the ownership model we have, just surviving and being a decent competitor in League One at this point is success. I agree. It would be lovely to see us find a way, and it is always going to be more difficult under the trust structure where there isn't the sugar daddy of just throwing money at the club short term. But there's equally a joy in the feeling that you get from even just following on all the clips the team does on YouTube of like just watching them training and just hearing from how people talk about the club. It's quite different, and some of the conversations you've had on this pod, Al, with others, just that feeling of the fact the club is sustainable, people want to be part of it for other reasons than simply the football. I think that's great. It's just as long as we can survive this first season and we can potentially build on that in future years. Championship would be lovely, but I'd hate us to go in there and struggle, and flail around at the bottom of the Championship. That would be worse almost than surviving competently at this level, I think.
And do you know what? I think you both have hit the nail on the head. And I know that we all go way back. One thing that I was really pleased of today was it was a cold, wet, rainy day in Exeter, right? And there were 6,100, I think, supporters there.
Wow. Yeah.
I particularly think that in League One, our core support, well, I know our average is this season, and we've still got games at Bolton and Plymouth Argyle to come. We're averaging over 6,750, I think, over the season. And to your point, you've obviously seen the 3 million investment in the training ground. The last 2 years, the corporate accounts have just come out, and actually in the episode before this, it goes out. I'm putting it out tomorrow, actually, your Sunday morning England time. Over the last 2 years, we've made, get this right, £4.7 million profit. And all that money's obviously being reinvested. And I don't think for a minute think that we're a championship team. Yeah. But we're getting the 13th highest average in League One. And, it is a great field. There's also, you'll find generationally, right, there's a lot more families going. And I think because of the, and some people know I wasn't Paul Tisdale's biggest fan, but the generations that have come through since then, they're now getting a lot older, the junior Grecians. And they're now, some of them are in their, between 19 and 25. And they are hardcore Exeter fans now. And I think it's grown, but how we sort the stadium conundrum out is the next bit. But I think that we're definitely a sustainable League One team now. Yeah. Have you seen the training ground, by the way? Have you seen that? Yeah.
Or at least on YouTube, the little clips they've shown, and even just that very quick walk around, even though it was clearly early days, it barely opened, barely taking the plastic off stuff. You can see how much more impressive a facility that's going to be for the players, and frankly, that's their office. We always think this as fans that the ground is the be all and end all, but it's actually the training ground you have to go to Monday to Friday. So it's great to see what they've done there.
and there's a plug for the podcast. If you go back to, I'm trying to think who it was. It was Sean Devine, I think, or Kevin Miller, commented. No, it was Sean Devine commented about Eamon Dolan, God rest his soul, was marking out the pitches for pre-season training, and you mentioned the manager, Andy Colin Appleton, which sends shivers down a lot of our spines. And I can't imagine for a minute that Gary Caldwell will be going out and painting white lines on football pitches. It'd be so it's a real step forward. I'm great to hear you say that. What are your favourite players at the moment, Giles? Go with you for the minute.
Favourite players, Giovanni Brown. I think he's the most exciting player, but unfortunate circumstances. It's a shame. A shame he's not playing at the moment. Leave that one there. That's the first name that comes to mind. But good to see Sam Nombe scoring again, and hopefully that'll build some momentum, and he can be the one that can get us the points that will leave us comfortably in that 12th spot.
Hey, what do you think of our academy graduates? And then I'll ask Andy.
Oh, great! It's great that the academy is really the foundations for the future of the club, and not having millions to buy players. I think it's great that the academy survived through some of the darker days when costs were being cut. I think keeping the academy was critical to some of the success that we're seeing now.
Definitely. I was thinking about the match day squads. I'll put one in for you. I think Josh Key's doing really well. I also think Alex Hartridge is doing well, apart from he got sent off today, but he's probably feeling really bad about that for 2 bookable offences. But Andy, your thoughts, players?
Probably a little bit like Giles, admittedly, because I'm only seeing the shorter, like 3-minute highlights. You tend to see more of the strikers, to be honest. So I would say until the unfortunate incident, I mean, Giovanni Brown was a joy to watch. Being a left-footed player as I was as well, it's delightful to see someone with his touch and skill. I've been enjoying Kevin McDonald in the last few weeks. Just the calmness, the finish he put away the other week was fantastic. And from what I hear about the way he's controlling the game from the central area, it's a joy when you get someone. Because it's not, if you think of all the players we've brought in over the years, you guys will both probably just about remember Steve Williams when Borley brought him in, who played that almost a similar role. And it was someone who played at genuinely the top level and come down and played for us when they were past their prime, but still able to dictate a game by the way they played. And I guess more recently, the name escapes me, the bald fella who went to America. Best player the last few seasons.
Nicky Law.
Yeah, Nicky Law. Again, someone else who, and McDonald looks to be kind of playing that role versus the completely spent someone who's just no use anymore.
And it's interesting you say about him. He didn't play today, although he was. He scored at Wickham our last game, at Wickham, and the game before, which he referred to. He apparently picked up an injury just after training. That's why he wasn't in, but. When you see him on the pitch, he is, and I'm going to put a shout out to Archie Collins, by the way, because he's a cracking midfielder. But he plays alongside Kevin. Kevin is 6'4", so when you see him on the pitch, he is quite imposing. Although he doesn't, how can I say? Like you say, he doesn't run around as much as you'd like, but he doesn't need to, and he seems to have that art of pushing players into the right positions, which is quite good. So
which for some of the younger people, for some of the younger players, exactly what they need that wise head just to give them that little on pitch guidance, because Gary and Kevin can't shout all the time from the sideline, but you just need someone just moving them along, and a really good player like that can get a lot more out of the younger players. My only concern, I think, with the squad at the moment is the number of players who aren't contracted beyond the end of the season.
Yes.
It's going to be a big turnover again, I imagine, in the summer, and that hinges on how well we'll do next year.
Yeah, I think so, because Kevin McDonald, and you're aware of his kidney transplant story, I guess.
Yeah.
He's only got 6 months. Sam Numbe is a big fan's favourite, and it's lovely, actually, the fact that his brother and his brother's children are very often in away ends all over the country, and he's a whole lovely family. It's got to be said. We need him to sign up. Archie Collins is in that bracket, I think. And it is slightly worrying times, shall we say. That said, there's still people coming through the academy, so let's hope that some of those come through as well.
Yeah, so, and I guess you've also got the longer loans like Stano and Blackman, who both presumably will go back at the end of the season as well. So
Blackman's on contract.
He is now, is he?
Yeah, but he's only on contract to the end of the season.
It was only 1 year, wasn't it?
Yeah. And sorry, who else did you say then? Who did you mention then? The other player?
Stano.
Oh, Stano, of course.
Yeah.
Who could forget? Yes, and he is. If he ever listens to one of these, and I know you've both seen him play, his father play. He is in his father's mould. He really is, and it's almost quite eerie sometimes, if you know what I'm saying. So, big shout to him. By the way, it sounds like a good point. I'm going to dedicate this podcast to Dominic, our friend, Dominic Saunders, and who passed, great Grecian and also a London exile. So I think he was a butler to the Lord Mayor of London, wasn't he, Andy?
He was, yes. He lived and worked at Mansion House for many years, which was an entertaining place to go to, I must say.
An absolute crazy character. So, just changing the subject a little bit. What's youth football and women's football like in Australia? Is it strong, or is it cricket that gets more Aussie rules?
I think Australia football is a really good participation sport in Australia, or soccer as it's kind of pitched because of the reference to Aussie rules football and footy, which is rugby league. But yeah, I play in an over 35s competition in my district, and that's given me a new lease of life playing. When I was in London for the Exiles, that was essentially an all-age team, and we got gradually older as everyone else seemed to get younger. So we won less and less games, and my own game was less competitive. But coming here and slotting, coincidentally, the year I moved, I was 35, and I found the local team. Just walked in the clubhouse, they were doing sign-ups, and I said, I want to play football, and they said, great, come and play for the over 35s team. And then that's been great. I've been playing in that comp since we moved here 8 years ago. My daughter plays as well in the same comp in an under 11s girls team.
Yeah,
and they have quite a few teams at that level. They've got teams through from under 8s right through to under 18s, under 21s, all age, and then over 35s, over 45s, over 50s, and then there's also women's teams as well, that across all of those different age groups, and there's probably it's not as many women's teams as at the senior level and as men's teams, but at the junior level there seems to be quite a few more than the senior level, and they also have mixed teams at junior level up to a certain age.
Okay. And today, by the way, was the Me Too game at Exeter, and having a daughter that's 18 years old who's a season ticket holder as well, although she didn't go today. Big movement of change in women's football in England. I know that you've probably seen the English women won the was it the Euros? It is massive over here now.
It's definitely taking off. I mean, interestingly, we've got probably one of the better players in the English league. Sam Kerr, who plays for Chelsea, is the Australian captain. She's been the top goal scorer, I think, in the women's league in England the last couple of seasons. The national women's team here is quite strong. Most of them increasingly play in Europe. And we have a national A League. There's the A League women's and the A League men's. So pretty much each club in the A League has a women's team as well. Brilliant. And for example, tomorrow afternoon I'm going to see, or is it Sunday? Yeah, tomorrow afternoon I'm going to see Victory play Western United in the men's. But before that, it's Victory women versus Melbourne City women.
And by the way, a big shout out to Exeter ladies or Exeter women. They've got a game Sunday English time tomorrow for me and today for you against Portishead Bristol.
That's right.
I'm led to believe there's going to be 2,000 people there.
It's fantastic to see that. And of course, in Australia and New Zealand, in a few months' time, we're hosting the Women's World Cup. So where England are probably one of the favourites, along with perhaps the US and maybe Holland. But there's going to be, they've increased, the opening game was going to be held in I think, Ed, in the regular Sydney football ground, the 55,000 one, and that's being moved because of demand to the bigger stadium that holds 85,000. So
is that the SDG, the cricket?
It's Ed will know them better. Where was it going to be and where is it going to be? If that makes sense.
It was going to be at Moore Park at the stadium there, the Sydney Football Stadium, and I think that holds about 50,000. But yeah, they're moving it to the Olympic Park and the stadium there that holds a lot more, nearer to 100, I think. But yeah, we've got stadium passes for both those stadiums for all of the matches being played in the stadiums in that tournament. So
yeah, we've got the same. We got the same for Melbourne. We've got city passes for all the matches that are played in Melbourne.
When's the tournament on again?
July to August, I want to say. It starts. I think it starts around the 20th of July.
Yeah,
the 20th of July. Yeah, that's great news. We're going to have to make sure that there's a couple of extra flags out there. So let me talk to the mysterious flag man of Exeter City and see whether we can get a few flags out to you there and make sure that there's a presence. Have you got flags yourself, just out of interest?
I've got one, but I've got an England flag that hasn't got an Exeter City on it. Okay. My brother Ed's got a South Coast Grecians one, and we took that to New Zealand for the cricket last month.
Okay. Well,
I've got a St George one somewhere, and I think with ECFC written on it, but I can't remember what the hell I used it for. I can remember making it one time, but I've no idea what game I took it to.
Well, I'm going to take the challenge, and it's really interesting that it's there at that time. So, which it's given me a thought about something else. Gentlemen, I'm conscious of your time and also my time in terms of it's almost bedtime for
someone's got to host match of the day in about 10 minutes, haven't they?
Well, yes.
If there's anyone left.
Match of the day. Yeah. We're apolitical on this show, but let's just say that that match of the day, gentlemen, is the biggest scandal on the national news at the moment.
It is. It's even on the radio. It's on the radio news here this morning.
So, yeah,
that's one of the things I miss about the football match of the day.
I'm going to say, I was going to ask you the question: do you get to see match of the day? You obviously don't.
You can see it if you use a VPN and an iPlayer app, but it's too complicated.
Too complicated. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, gentlemen, it's going to be an interesting one tonight. Look, I'm going to close the show at this point in terms of partly because I need to get some sleep. Seriously, it's been a long day. Look. This is the longest distance show we've ever done or may ever do. It's 10,503 miles, I believe, to Melbourne. So, does that sound right, Giles?
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Even longer than Sydney then.
Yeah, of course. It'll be belong to Sydney. I really appreciate you coming on. It's gonna go out. Where are we? It's the 11th of March today. It's going to go out in about a fortnight. I will let you know when it goes out. And if you're coming back to England, you've got to let us know. And obviously, we'll talk about anybody who wants to go out to Australia. If you want to look up some crazy Grecians, right, then these two gentlemen are your men. So, Giles, you're an absolute star for sorting this out. Thank you. Andy, absolutely brilliant to see you, my friend. It's been far too long. It really has. Appreciate you coming on. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thanks,
Thank
Al.
No, thanks for doing the pod.
Oh, absolute pleasure. Absolute pleasure. Good day. See you later.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Hi, it's the close of the show. I've got a lot more energy now because that was a particularly late night recording, and especially after driving 180 odd miles back from Exeter and Singers Win, that was quite a logistical achievement that Giles put together, getting us together because the time zones were very different. Thanks to Andy and Giles for coming on. Andy, massive impact on the London Exiles, and really one of the founding fathers, should I say, of that organisation. Giles, again, big impact on WorldNet and Andros, and they've been over to Brazil, and it's quite a trek to go from Australia to Brazil, I've just realised, so that's a massive thing. Giles is going to be back for the Plymouth Argyle game with his family, and I believe his two daughters will be in the Guard of Honour. Thanking very much to Richard Knight for sorting that out over the past week. Please like, share, subscribe. Please don't forget Brian McDermott evening. It's only a week to go. Look out for the auction. If you can't get there, you can still place bids on some of the auction prizes. One of which will be a signed sign for the players' entrance at the training ground. That one is not to be missed. It's signed by all the players. And do you know what, Exeter City? You are absolutely fabulous for doing that. And a big shout out to our kit man, Mr. Stone. You did brilliantly salvaging that and getting it signed. So thank you very much. There are plenty other things going on in the auction, including signed balls, pennants, things to do in the West Country, and it's lots of toys. It's going to be really fabulous. So if you're not going, don't worry. Please look out for the auction and try and play a part in it. In the meantime, that was lads from the land down under. Have a nice weekend, and look out for the bonus episode coming out from Mr. Daniel Bailey. Danny Bailey is coming. And if you get this podcast, you've heard it here first. Enjoy. Football's a beautiful game.